This is the Big Stories Podcast, where we tell the amazing and inspiring stories from across the Big 12 Conference.
I'm your host, Cleon Wall. On today's episode, new football coaches in new Big 12 places. We're talking Iowa State and Oklahoma State on today's episode. Plus, we get a look at the Colorado Buffaloes during spring football. But first, let's get to our storylines.
The Big Stories' 5 biggest storylines. Number 1.
In the near future, we're hoping to talk to podcasters about new QBs in new places. And one of those QBs was former Cincinnati Bearcat turned new Texas Tech signal caller Brendan Sorsby. Now we've got to wonder if he's even going to be on the team next season. Reports came out on Monday that he's being investigated by the NCAA for betting on sports, which is a big no-no. Depending on how it's adjudicated, he could lose part of the season, the whole season, or be kicked out of college sports altogether. Sorsby, for his part, has checked into a residential treatment center to address his gambling addiction. And as for the team, they've always got backup Will Hammond, who played a bit last season but also tore his ACL and may not be ready for the season opener. Yikes and double yikes for the team who dominated the conference last season and was probably the odds-on favorite to win the conference this season.
Number 2.
Texas Tech softball team has clinched the regular season crown with a week left. They swept their weekend series at Arizona State and only have 2 conference losses going into their final Big 12 series against Baylor. Those losses, they were at Utah and at second-place Arizona way back in the middle of March.
Number 3.
How about those Iowa State women's golfers taking home their first ever Big 12 championship? The team shot 5 under. Houston was 6 shots back in second place, and UCF placed third with a score of +6. By the way, the men's golf conference championship started on Monday.
Number 4.
Florida State bested TCU for the Big 12 beach volleyball title. It's the Seminoles' inaugural season in the league, and they dominated the event. They didn't drop a point in their semifinal win over Arizona, nor in the championship final. FSU and TCU will now represent the Big 12 in the National Collegiate Beach Volleyball Championship.
Number 5.
The Big 12 set a conference record with a total of 38 selections in the 2026 NFL Draft. Texas Tech's David Bailey was the first Big 12 player to hear his name called when he was drafted by the New York Jets. The conference wrapped up its representation in the draft with the 256th pick. That was Utah's Dallin Bentley being picked by the Denver Broncos. Bailey, ASU's Jordan Tyson, and Utah's Spencer Fano were all selected in the top 10. That's the most top 10 picks for the conference since 2012. And that's going to do it for the Big Stories storylines. Next, it's our query of the week. How will new coaches do in new places? 4 Big 12 teams will be led by new coaches this season. And last week, we talked about Utah and Kansas State. This week, we've got the other 2 teams. Let's begin with Oklahoma State, who fired longtime head coach Mike Gundy during the season and now has Eric Morris as its new head man. Here is Locked On Oklahoma State podcast host Cody Stovall.
Well, it's typically difficult to find many guarantees after an abysmal 1-win season. At least the new era under Eric Morris in Oklahoma State country feels like it comes with a guarantee of offense again. The days of putting up 45, 55 points inside Boone Pickens Stadium appear to be right around the corner. Defensively, Coach Skylar Cassidy has been along for the ride for a couple years now with Eric Morris. He has already been successful in multiple stops when it comes to at least creating enough turnovers to give a lot of hope. When you have guys like Anai White coming over from Penn State and Jerry Lawson from Louisville, and you have year 2 of Trip White coming over from Ole Miss with some of the returning guys like Jaleel Johnson, Deshaun Brown, it does feel like there's an even mix of enough talent to get Oklahoma State back into at least contention for the Big 12 championship. Of course, you have a lot of these North Texas guys coming over, so the continuity within the locker room and the learning of schematics seems to be a little bit more enhanced than you would think of when you think of 80 new football players. It is a new era, it is a new age, and the offense, at least, is going to be back again in Stillwater, Oklahoma.
It will also be a new era in Ames, Iowa, as Jimmy Rogers takes over the Iowa State Cyclones after Matt Campbell left to take over the Penn State Nittany Lions. Here is Ben Hutchins of the Quad City Times.
for the past 10 seasons, Iowa State football has been the picture of consistent success in the Big 12, as Iowa State has won at least 7 games in 8 of the last 10 seasons under Matt Campbell. But now, for the first time in a decade, there's a lot of new around this Iowa State team, as Matt Campbell had departed for Penn State University, and he took a lot of guys with him. At one point this offseason, Iowa State was down to 17 players on the roster, and those 17 players are now the only holdovers into the Jimmy Rogers era. Iowa State hired the old Washington State coach, and they're bringing in a defensive mindset. Jimmy Rogers and company had the number 15 ranked total defense last season with Washington State, and they pair that with new offensive coordinator Tyler Roll, who was with the Detroit Lions last year, but a familiar face around Ames. Roll preaches physicality, and more physicality with his rushing game. He's a former running backs coach at Iowa State, and I fully anticipate Iowa State to have a more possession-based offense this season, where they want to win the game with that defense. They really built around the defensive line. If you look at where they retained Iowa State's players, Zamir Hawk, a prominent returning defensive lineman. And on the offensive side, Iowa State invested in the trenches as well, which to me indicates that it's going to be a possession-based offense. And you maybe hope from an Iowa State perspective that Arkansas State quarterback Jalen Rayner will have some ability to go run around and make some plays and return some of that exciting brand to Iowa State University.
Thanks again to Ben and Cody. All right, it's story time, and this week we're heading to Boulder, Colorado for a look at the Colorado Buffaloes and what head coach Deion Sanders has in store for 2026. Coach Prime's first season was a bit of a downer. His second was solid with Heisman Trophy winner Travis Hunter. Then the Buffs struggled again last season, going 3-9. So what should we expect in Season 4 with Coach Sanders? Let's find out from Brian Howell of the Boulder Daily Camera.
Well, I think the expectation obviously is always different, whether that's in the building or outside the building. Obviously inside the building they're going to say it's conference championship and beyond. But I think outside the building, the realistic expectation or hope for this team would be to just get back to a bowl game. I think that's a huge thing for this program is just get to a bowl. And for some programs, that's no big deal. There's some programs that getting to a bowl is a bad season. For Colorado, that would be a big deal. If they get to a second bowl in 3 seasons, that has not happened in over 2 decades. So that would be a massive thing. And, if they can get there, that's big. I think they just got to get to 6 wins.
The Buffs have picked up an incredibly high number of transfer players in the offseason. I think around 43. Again, that's nothing new with Coach Prime. A few notable names include linebacker Leonga Lefau. I believe that's how you pronounce his name. He's coming from Texas, as well as Boo Carter, a safety out of Tennessee. What can you tell us about these guys and how they hopefully will make a difference on the Buffs defense?
Yeah, they're hoping that those guys, make a difference. I mean, obviously, Lefau was a starter for a Texas team that was in the CFP 2 years ago, and was on the verge of it last year. And so you would think he'd be able to come in and be a top player for the Buffs this year. Boo Carter is one that, a former 4-star that had some issues at Tennessee and got dismissed from the team last season, but his talent is off the charts. I mean, their cornerbacks coach, Kevin Mathis, told us a couple weeks ago that outside of Travis Hunter, Boo Carter might be the most talented player he's ever coached. So there's high hopes for Boo Carter to really potentially be a star if he can get rid of some of the issues he had at Tennessee. And so they believe in those 2 guys. And there's others on this defense that they need to step up. But I think those are 2 key guys.
Not only are there new defensive players, but there's a new defensive coordinator in Chris Marve, who was elevated after Robert Livingston left to go coach for the Denver Broncos. This is Coach Prime's 3rd defensive coordinator in 4 seasons. Are we expecting anything different from Chris's defense compared to last year under Livingston, since he coached under Livingston?
Yeah, I think there's going to be differences. I don't know to what depth. for some context, I mean, Marv was hired as the linebackers coach, and Livingston left for the job for the Broncos 5 days before spring ball started. So it was really quick going into spring ball. We've heard from some players saying, some things are different, but not drastically. One player told us that, hey, we've had to learn a whole new defense. So we asked Chris Marv late in spring. They wrapped up on last Saturday, but last week we asked him, well, how much of your defense is installed percentage-wise? And he goes, more than one, less than 100. So who knows where they are with that, but I think there's going to be some differences. There always is with a coordinator, right? And I don't know how drastically, because, look, the team they recruited to the Robert Livingston defense because he was here. So they're going to have to kind of do some of those same things, I think, from last year.
Another key transfer out of Texas is DeAndre Moore Jr. He's been injured. He sat out spring practices, but he's someone that we may want to keep an eye on come September. What does his skill set, what is it going to provide for the Buffs offense?
Well, yeah, he missed all of spring ball. He was looking good at the spring game, actually jogging, catching a few passes, in warm-ups. So he's looking better. But yeah, he's a bigger receiver. They've got a lot of small, speedy receivers that fit well in Brennan Marion's offense. But DeAndre Moore is more of that bigger type of receiver that Marion is familiar with. I mean, he was at Texas a couple years ago with Moore, so he knows DeAndre a little bit. So he's going to be that big physical receiver I think that they need.
How has the offense adjusted under new offensive coordinator Brennan Marion?
They love it. The go-go offense, has gotten a lot of attention for, it's a little bit different. It's up-tempo. Clearly the offense is going to be a little bit more behind than the defense at this point in time. The quarterbacks are getting to learn this new offense, but it sounds like the players love it. Julian Lewis, the quarterback, told us early in camp that he was really excited about it. And they were pretty vanilla on Saturday. There was only one touchdown in the quote spring game, but there's more things to it than we saw last year under Pat Shurmur, and so I think players are really enjoying it. And there's a few players from Sacramento State that he coached, and so they wouldn't have followed him here if they didn't like the offense. So I think there's some excitement about what this offense can be.
That's going to do it for this episode of Big Stories. On Thursday's episode, former Oklahoma State grad Stacey McDaniel and her husband noticed that some kids in OKC didn't play sports because they couldn't afford the equipment. That all changed when they started collecting some equipment and then handing it out to young athletes. Cleats for Kids has scaled up a bit since then, helping kids across the entire Sooner State. We'll have their story on Thursday. Thanks again to Brian Howell, Cody Stovall, and Ben Hutchins. Garrett Glauser produced this episode. I'm your host, Cleon Wall, and Big Stories is a production of BYU Radio.